Hello, here we are with a comparison of the Samsung Galaxy S4 against the Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini. Now, both these devices are successors to the Samsung Galaxy S3 series of devices, and we're going to be putting the two sort of head to head to see how they compare side by side and whether they actually compare or are worth an upgrade to the original Samsung Galaxy S3 devices. So as you can see, we've got a black mist Samsung Galaxy S4 and a white frost Galaxy S4 Mini. So let's start with the actual sort of size and design. So you can see that the S4 is the bigger of the two devices, and that's naturally going to be the case because of the actual size of the screen. You can see that the thickness, there is very little difference between the two. Whilst on paper there is a difference, in their hand it's very hard to actually tell that difference between the two devices. And of course, from the actual profile of the devices, you can see how they're very similar. We've got the speak up here at the top, we've got the home button in the middle with the silver accent around them, we've got the curvature around the edges and side of the device, and we've also got the sort of silver banding that runs around both of them. You can see we've got similar locations for the power buttons. We've got recesses here for the removable back cover. Coming to the bottom, you can see how the micro USB ports are central on both. The microphones are in different positions on the two devices. On the other side, the volume rocker keys stay in pretty much the same position. And then coming round to the top, again, similar sort of setup, 3.5mm headphone jacks, microphones, and then infrared blasters for the remote control feature that both devices actually have. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the two devices. So on the right hand side, we've got the S4 with its 4.99 inch display against the S4 Mini that's got a 4.3 inch display. Now the 4.3 inch display is an increase of 0.3 inches over and above the S3 Mini, and the S4 is an increase of essentially 0.2 inches over the original Samsung Galaxy S3, and the difference between the two is 0.7 of an inch in comparison to 0.8 of an inch between the original Samsung Galaxy S3 Mini and the Galaxy S3. So the S4 Mini has actually increased in size, and it's not so mini in comparison to a lot of handsets that do actually have screens of less than 4 inches, maybe around the 3.5 inches. So overall, whilst there is a size difference and a usage difference with the actual displays, the screen's actually got bigger on the Mini. Now we should look at the resolution. The S4 is the high-end device. With that 4.99 inch display, we've got a resolution of 1920 by 1080, which makes it full HD, and it's got a Super AMOLED screen with a pixel density of 441 pixels per inch. The S4 Mini, on the other hand, has a resolution of 960 by 540, and that has a pixel density of 256. Now, it's not that easy to pick up on camera, so I'm hoping this shows up, but you can basically see that the blue background on the Galaxy S4 is a little bit deeper around the edges, and into the middle it becomes lighter, but not as light as the S4 Mini. Now both screens are at full brightness here, but you can sort of see that color difference just a little bit, and it's only when you get really close and with the human eye can you really tell the difference between the two. So the S4 one certainly does pop out a little bit more, and that certainly is more true when you're looking at images. But to be absolutely fair, the S4 Mini still has a very good screen, and we're hard pushed to really knock this because it's generally good enough for what you're going to be wanting from a smartphone, be it text messaging, web browsing, all the things like that. There's not going to really be a great deal of difference between the two. The S4 is really only going to stand out if you're into high definition graphics and movies on the go, but the downside is that's going to naturally draw more power. So talking of power, we might as well go and look at the battery. Now both of them have got removable batteries, thankfully, under the back cover. So we've got the S4 Mini there that has the smaller battery of the two, it's got 700 milliamp hours less in comparison to the Galaxy S4 battery, which is up at 2600. So whilst the S4 boasts the bigger battery, the bigger screen naturally draws more power. So I wouldn't really say that there's a considerable amount of difference, because the advantages of the bigger battery on the S4 are outweighed by the additional screen size. So in terms of daily usage, it's very difficult to give a daily usage because so much is personal, but both will get roughly a day's usage out of them, and you'll probably be needing to charge them in the evening. I use the S4 as my own personal device, and I can say often by 6 o'clock in the evening I'm needing to actually charge it up. But the benefit here, because they're both removable batteries, you can have a spare one ready for use with additional accessories and charging docks, etc. Now both have micro SIM card slots and micro SD card slots. It's under the battery on the S4 Mini, but both are removable, and you can expand the memory up to 64 gig on each of them. I should also mention that whilst we're under the back covers here, both have NFC, so that's built into the device through the batteries. One of the advantages that the S4 has over and above the S4 Mini is the ability to do wireless charging. Now what you'll see here is two little gold pins, and there are two options really when it comes to wireless charging for the S4. Samsung offer a replacement back cover because it's not built in. Whilst it has the capability, you need a replacement back cover that has the wireless charging technology built into it. And that comes at a considerable cost, but what happens is when you put the replacement cover on, it lines up with these pins here. Now what there is available as a third-party solution when you buy from Clove is a little receiver that connects to these pins here, sits under the standard back cover, and allows you to have wireless charging whilst not restricting the NFC capability of the device. It's a little bit cheaper. It does sort of sometimes stretch the back cover just that little bit, but the additional thickness is nothing in comparison to the official Samsung Galaxy S4 back cover, which is also more expensive. Now that option is there. It's entirely up to you whether you actually use it. Now we mentioned the memory. Now both devices do have onboard memory. On the S4 Mini you've got 8 gig, and on the S4 you've got 16. Now some markets there are 32 or 64 gig variants of the S4, but we're talking about UK SIM-free models here. Now this is where it starts to get really tricky. It depends on your usage, how many apps and games and things you play. Out of the box, from the 8 gig on the S4 you get round about 5 gig available to you to actually use once the operating system's been installed. So you can see you've got 8 gig there. We've got some files installed on here, so you've got about 4.65 available. Now this is my personal device, so the memory isn't as you would get out the box, but you can see that from the 16 gig that's on board this device, you actually only get 9.23 gig available to you for use of apps and things like that, and it's been well documented. Now I try to be quite careful on how much I store on my device, so I've got around 2 gigs still available, but if you're downloading a lot of games and things to the device, then this could potentially be an issue. If you stream your audio and video files, then that's going to be a little bit easier and save on the onboard memory. Samsung have released an update for the S4 to allow some apps to be moved to the SD card. You don't currently have that capability on the S4 Mini. So it's really going to depend on how many apps and things you actually download. But of course, both of them can be extended in terms of memory through the micro SD card slot that support up to 64 gig cards. So if you have a lot of music and video files, they can go on the SD card, but apps potentially not. But out the box as a ratio, the S4 Mini actually does a little bit better. Now whilst we're in the settings here, a lot of the things are very similar, but some of the main things to actually draw your attention to, and when considering this device, are some of the advanced settings that have been talked about a lot on the Galaxy S4, and you might be misled into thinking they're going to be available on the S4 Mini, because they're not. So if we go into motions and gestures here, you'll see how the menus differ. You've got an air gesture option on the S4 where you haven't on the S4 Mini, and that's because you don't have the air gestures view or options within the S4 Mini. Now, some of those are potentially a bit gimmicky. It's going to be personal preference as to whether you like them. Some work, some don't work so well. Some it's just a bit of a learning curve to get used to them, but just want to make you aware that there are differences there. And you'll also see here that you've got an additional air view option here, which you don't have on the S4 Mini. Now, if we go and look at other sort of things here, now I've got a slightly different launcher on the S4 here, but you can see the sort of general interface is very similar. We can press and hold on both and sort of see our running apps. It's all sort of configured very similarly. We can drop down from here and get different bits of information that we want and shortcuts into our settings and everything. Now, general performance on the pair of them is very good. Now, this is where it's going to get down to the nitty gritty. If you're a power user, then the S4 is likely to be for you, because it's got a 1.9 gigahertz quad core processor, whereas the Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini only has a dual core processor, and that's 1.7 gigahertz. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, if you're just doing a little bit of web browsing, text messaging, then you're not going to need the additional power that the S4 brings. It's if you're into intense gaming that quad core is really going to come into its own and actually be of a real advantage to you. Now, both handled multitasking fairly well. The S4 has 2 gig of RAM in comparison to the 1.5 on the S4 Mini. So if you need to really run apps a lot of the time and a lot of apps together, then the S4 is going to be better. But a little bit of app management on the S4 Mini and you can be in just a good position. We noticed very little slowdown. Occasionally there was some slowdown on the S4 Mini. We do notice that when you're running the S4 quite intensely, it gets a bit hot on the back here. Now, not too hot that it's unbearable to touch, but just slightly on the uncomfortable side. It's just like, oh, should it be that hot? Now, they both have a whole range of connectivity options, be it 3G, NFC, 4G, it's all built in here. The only real consideration around connectivity is through the micro USB port. Now, on the S4, you've got video out through an MHL2 connection there, which means you can connect the S4 to an HD display and share the screen on a larger display. Great for giving presentations and playing back video and pictures. You can't do that on the 4 Mini. You don't have that capability through the micro USB port. We've tried it. The only option you've got is to use Samsung's all-share cast dongle, which will stream the content wirelessly, and that works with both devices. And with that sort of thing, it's going to draw power if you're constantly online, be it GPS and things like that. And within the settings, you do have the option to actually control some of the power. Let's just go into that and try and show you. You've got power saving mode, which is available on both devices, and this is in a last ditch resort really. If you need to conserve power, you can do by switching this mode on. Now, another big thing to talk about is the camera. The S4 packs a 13 megapixel camera with LED flash, whereas the S4 Mini has just a 8 megapixel camera. Now, I say just an 8 megapixel camera, it's not all about megapixels, but our testing has revealed that the S4 does, in our opinion, produce better results. Now, I'm just going to show you a few things within the camera as best as I possibly can to give you an idea of what it's like. So let's just go into the camera application, and you can see that when you're in here, the initial sort of setup is almost identical. On both devices, we've got this mode button where we can go in and select what mode we want. Now, there are some differences, and that could be just down to updates, but you can see on the S4 we have a razor mode, but that's not actually on here. on the S4 Mini, so that's not there. The other one on the S4 Mini, we've got continuous shot, but we don't have that as an option on here on the S4. We'll come back to that in a moment. We also don't have animated photo on the S4 Mini. So there's another little differentiator between the two, but you've got a lot of the things that you can want, from panorama to sports to night to auto, and in our testing we've used it all on auto mode. Now, talking of that continuous shot, on the S4 Mini it allows you to take 3 pictures per second up to 20 pictures in total. Now, you don't have that option on the S4 within the mode, but what you do is you go into the settings, and in here you have burst shot, and that's essentially the same principle. You can switch that on, but the difference is that with the S4 Mini, to take continuous shots like that, you have to go into the mode. If on the S4 you've got this option turned on, you could be snapping one still image one moment, and then very quickly just carry on pressing the shutter button, and you can be taking burst shot photos very quickly. Now, with both of them, you can record 1080p video on the rear cameras. You can control all the settings and configuration. You can take still images whilst recording video. You'll actually see at the bottom here, both give the option for different effects, but you can see how the S4 has a few more options in terms of the effects that you apply to the actual image. Now, it depends how into that you are, but a lot of that can be resolved through third-party imaging apps. With both of them, you've got shortcuts to the gallery. The other feature that's missing on the S4 Mini over and above the S4 is the dual camera mode. So if I switch this on here, you can see it's now using the front-facing camera as well as the rear-facing camera. You don't have that option on the S4 Mini. Now, that may be a deal breaker for you, it may not be. So I think I've covered most elements between the two devices. It's a very tricky decision. The S4 is without doubt the headline device, but you're going to be paying that bit more for the device, and it's whether you want to pay that extra bit of money. I think if you're considering an upgrade from the S3 Mini or the S3, if you're due an upgrade or have the funds available, then there are some advantages to these devices. If you're not quite ready or at the stage to upgrade, I don't think there is enough to make you jump or upgrade early. They are both very good devices and worthwhile successors to the S3, but you know, hold your money for a bit until you really need to upgrade between the two, because there isn't an awful lot of difference. I think the S4 Mini personally is verging on the perhaps too bigger side of Mini now, but having said that, from a usability point of view, and I can genuinely say this having used the S4 for several months, you can use this in one hand with the S4 Mini. The S4 you really can't. I can't stretch the top corner of my screen and generally have to use two hands to maximize use of the device. So web browsing and everything is brilliant on the S4. You've got lots of real estate for it, but practicality, the S4 Mini is a little bit better. Now, obviously the S4 Mini is the cheaper of the two devices. I'm not going to quote prices at this time because it's always changing, but cut a long story short, it's going to be a very personal decision as to whether it's worth the upgrade. Over a 2-year period that you might be using the Galaxy S4, it might be worth spending that little bit more. But if you are a little bit tight for money or you can't justify the stretch to this, then I don't think you'll be disappointed with the S4 Mini. Just be aware of the features that are missing from the S4 Mini over and above the original Galaxy S4. For more information or a full detailed review, check out our blog, blog.clove.co.uk. There's more details on the comparison. But until next time, thanks for watching.